specialists. I am going to demonstrate for you. First, I'm going to show you how the workflow can work, and we'll use a couple of different scenarios and ways that you can access Dynamics GP for workflow. And then I'll have a very short discussion just on where the workflow is set up and what kind of options you can use for a requisition workflow. And so just to kind of explain some background on this, in Dynamics GP, we actually have 3 levels of users. A lot of companies who purchased GP back in the day have some of these users, and they don't even know they had them because they were grandfathered in when GP's business portal product was migrated off and they did some license changes. So for the demonstration today, I am going to use both a self-service user and a full user. The self-service user can be used, and I apologize, on my screen it shows 18% enhancement. It's actually only 18% the first year. It is 16% each additional year after that if you would like to purchase self-service users. But I'm going to use the self-service user license to go ahead and enter a requisition and show you through the GP for web, what a GP web client looks like and what a user entering a requisition would see. The web client is a very useful tool in this scenario simply because you do not have to install it on other users' desktop for them to be able to get into GP and enter in these requisitions. The other license that I'm going to use is, of course, the full user license. And in order for me to finish and turn the requisition into a purchase order, I do have to use a full user license. Now, there is a license in between, which is actually a limited user license. Sorry, I could not remember the name off the top of my head. So limited user license will also provide everything that the self-service user provides, except for it also allows users to run reports and to run smart lists. So if you have somebody who's maybe needs a little more information out of GP that they couldn't get before, you could consider purchasing using a self-service user license. Or sorry, excuse me, a limited user license. We're actually not going to be using one of those today simply because we don't need one at the time. Now, one thing is extremely important that makes this product the absolute most useful in deployment is that you do not actually need any GP user licenses for anybody who wants to approve a workflow when using GP's web services. So the web services product actually comes with Dynamics GP. It sometimes just doesn't get deployed because we just deploy it as people generally need to use it. But the web services allows GP to send an email, and in that email, they can list information about the requisition, and then they'll have a link for an approve and a link for a deny. And then the user can go ahead and click on one of those links, and I'll demonstrate. But that means that people who don't even have a license in GP can be added to your workflow, and you can record when they approve or reject a workflow item without having to have a user license. So one thing to note, if you're wondering if you have any of these licenses, you can go to the Dynamics GP button up in the corner, the little blue question mark, go to About Dynamics GP, and you'll see a link there that says users. When you click on that, it will tell you how many users you are registered for, and it will break it down based off of whether it's a self-service user, a limited user, or a full user license. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and do a little demonstration for you. So as I stated, you can use a web client and you can use the GP full client. And then in our demonstration, we're actually going to use an email to approve that requisition so that you can kind of see all of the options that we have available. So I'm starting here. This is what the GP web client looks like. Now, unlike Dynamics GP itself, this actually does use Windows authentication. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in here. Had to remember my password for a moment. I'm going to use this as a public computer because this is actually an environment that all of our consultants may need to access from time to time. And you'll see here, it is logging me in. And I just used my username and password on there. I did not have to have a separate password for Dynamics GP. And we're almost there. Okay, and that's just telling me that I'm using the sample company data. So within GP, the users will only have access to what their license allows them to have and what you give them security to. So in our case, we're going to go to the purchasing module, and you'll notice here that they only have two options. The first is a purchasing requisition inquiry, and the second is the actual entry for purchase requisitions. One other thing to note is that in the purchasing requisition inquiry, you can limit what they can see. So in this case, I'm actually limited to only see requisitions that have been entered by myself. But you can open this up to allow other people to see everybody's requisitions, and it is on a user by user basis. So you can determine that, you know, some users only see what they entered and other users can see all of the requisitions. So I'm going to start here by opening the purchase requisition screen. And GP will give me a requisition number. I can go ahead and enter a description. You can use predefined comment IDs, or you can actually enter an additional comment IDs. And then you have access to the ship to addresses. And you'll notice that I have that little icon right there. So you can tell that my comment has been edited. I'm going to go ahead and pick a ship to address. And then down here, I can determine based off of my Dynamics GP setup of whether or not I have to use actual inventory items, or you can use non-inventory items. So in my demonstration today, I'm going to use a non-inventory item. If you were going to use an actual inventory item, you could just click on the magnifying glass. It'll pull up the inventory items that you normally have in your system, and they can go ahead and select one. In my case, though, I'm going to go ahead and enter in just an item number. This is just an identifier for that. So my unit of measure will pop up as each. My quantity ordered, I'm going to order 5 of these at $10 a piece. So there's a $50 requisition. And I can put my description in. And then I have my option to look up my site ID. These are all the site IDs that are normally located in your system. Usually there are not as many as in our sample data. I'm going to go ahead and pick the main site or the warehouse site. Now, if they know the vendor ID, they are certainly able to enter it. If they don't know the vendor ID, they can leave that blank. And during the purchasing process, the actual purchaser will have an opportunity to review what's being purchased and change that vendor ID or select the vendor ID if one was not selected. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick a vendor ID here. Where are you? Business systems here. Sorry, I could have just typed that in. It probably would have been faster. So I'm going to go ahead and select that there. And then if you're using multi-currency, it does support multi-currency. I'm actually not going to pick this vendor. I apologize, because I do not want to use a Canadian vendor. Let's try that one more time there. We'll pick the one right above it. There we go, US dollars. Of course, you can pick a shipping method just like you can with a purchase order. We're going to choose ground, and you'll notice right here that the account number has been populated. Depending on the vendor that you're using, it could be coming from the vendor. In this case, this vendor doesn't actually have a default account, so it's looking at the system settings, and it's taking the account from the posting setup that looks all over Dynamics GP. If you're using inventory, then the inventory item will drive whatever that GL account number is. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a different account because I do not want this going into an asset account. And you'll notice here that the users will have ability to look up accounts that you give them access to. I don't see any because I actually didn't grant, by setup, grant them access to see certain accounts. So in this case, maybe I just know what account I should put, like 5360, or if I type in the wrong number, it'll tell me it doesn't exist. Actually, off the top of my head, I don't know an account, so I'm just going to leave that there for now. But you can see how you can actually control what the users can actually code to as well. Once they're finished with entering their requisition, they do have the option here that they can print the report. I'm going to go ahead and click on the submit button. And that's going to submit it through my workflow. And I'm going to say, please approve per George. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. Okay. So now that my requisition has been submitted, I can go ahead and see it here in my requisition inquiry. If I had just saved it and I hadn't submitted it yet, it would be under save. Now that I have submitted it, I do have it here. This would be the one right here. And then of course I can drill down into my requisition screen, just like you can with the other inquiry screens, and see the details of how that was actually set up. All right. So next comes the fun part of what happens when somebody gets an email about that. So I'm going to show you. First is that you'll notice that these are actually coming from one of our consultants, Terry Armstrong. Let me open up the email here. And that's simply because she used her username and email address when she set this up. You can use any username and email address that you would like, as well as whoever gets replied to. But in my case, this first one is just letting me know, as the person who entered it, that I submitted the document. This one right here is who the person in the workflow would get. And you can include additional information here. So right here, I say, hey, here's a document. Now, if they have GP installed, or they have access to the to the web client, they can click on that, log in, and actually see the requisition. Otherwise, if they're going to be a user who doesn't have a license, you can include the information here in the email, just stating what it is that you want them to approve. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and hit this button here that says approve. Now, I do have one problem that only exists for me, which is that because I am remote and using a VPN, when I click on that link, it doesn't actually work for me. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and open a browser and paste the link in. And then you'll notice they'll get a screen here where they can say that they approve, or if they clicked on the deny, they can enter notes that say that they deny it. They'll get this message here, your approval has been submitted for this workflow step. So we did test this. Absolutely, you do not have to have a user license assigned to you. You simply have to be set up as part of the workflow in GP. And there is one additional step in that you just want to make sure that in your Active Directory, those users are set up with email addresses. Otherwise, it won't work. But we generally cover that as part of the installation for the web service product. Now, if I go into my purchase requisition, in my purchase requisition, you'll see here's my requisition. And when I drill down into it, I will be able to see in a moment the history. And in this history, it will track when it was submitted and who approved it. Now, normally the person who's submitting it is not going to be the person who approves it. I simply set that up for demonstration purposes. I'm going to go ahead and close out of that for a moment. Now I'm going to sign in as a user with a full license. Since I'm using my login to associate myself as a self-service user, I'm going to be using the system administrator just to show you how you purchase the workflow into an actual purchase order. So within the purchasing module, you'll have this list here of purchasing requisition transactions that you can add filters for. In my case, I've actually added a filter here for ones that have been approved and that are ready to purchase. Now, this is going to take a moment to fire up. And I apologize, I should have thought of this before I had started the demonstration. This does use SQL Server reporting services, which again, we include as part of the installation of GP. We actually do that one automatically because there's several reports in GP that are useful in there. But if you're the first person on the server in the morning and nobody's used that server, it does take a moment to fire up. So while we wait for that to fire up, I do want to, well, gosh dang it, I apologize. I'm trying to open GP over here on my local machine and to see if I have any. I don't think I have any workflows set up, but we can at least talk about what your options are for how users can approve workflows. Let me get that out of the way for a moment. Okay. I'm still waiting for that to fire up. I apologize. So I'm going to come over here to my machine now. I actually haven't even set a workflow up in here yet, but I'm going to show you where it gets set up and what your options are. So under Tools, Setup, Company, you'll have an option here for workflow. Now you can actually set a workflow calendar, so that can let you trigger tasks based on date. For example, if somebody submits it to one user and that user hasn't approved it within 3 days, it can be forwarded or escalated to a different user. That's one of the options there. The way it determines what days are your business days is based off of the workflow calendar here. Now I'm going to go into the workflow maintenance. Also, I just wanted to say there is also an email message set up. So whatever gets put into that email that gets sent to that approver, as we saw on our screen, that's actually maintained here in the email message setup. But here we go, workflow maintenance. These are all the places in GP that you can set a workflow, and there are several of them. We're just focused on the purchasing module today, but you'll see that we have them through payroll, projects, even some administration tasks. The Microsoft team has put a lot of effort into expanding where workflows can be. So in purchasing, I'm going to come here to purchase requisition approval. And then right here, I can go ahead and say that I want a new workflow. And you only have to do this kind of setup once. I'm only setting this up simply so that I can show you what it looks like. Now I have to save my workflow. Then I can go ahead and add steps to my workflow. Now, your steps can be that one person has to approve it, another person has to do something else to it, either it's a task or it's an approval. In my case, maybe we're going to say here that is an approval, and then we can determine whether it is only required at certain times or whether it's always required. This is where you would set the rules as to who approves what. So you can have 3 different approvers based on dollar values if that is what you need. Basically what you say is that this person only has to approve when the following condition is met, and it can be a dollar amount. It can also be any one of several fields. We can do it off a GL account number. We can do it off of something they enter in a comment or a particular comment ID. We can do it based off of who requested the requisition. We can base it off of, you know, all of these items that are available on the requisition. It does look at both the line items and when it says work, it's actually referring to the header. We can also say it's based off of the domain username. So these are all areas where we can set up rules to drive where the requisition is created, or sorry, how the workflow would be processed through after the requisition is created. So that is a little bit about how we set up workflows. We hope to dig into this maybe in a later webinar, simply because this area here can get quite complicated depending on what you need to set up. So back over on our machine over here, my SSRS is finally loaded up. So here is the normal purchasing requisitions transaction screen, and you'll notice every requisition is out there. There are no filters. You can add filters here, and then you can save your filters. Sorry, add filters here and save your filters there. In my case, what I did is I added a filter where the workflow is completed and the requisition status is submitted. And so by using that, I now have a purchase order, a requisition that's available to purchase. So you'll notice here's my same requisition number that ends with a 7. Here's my requisition. And then as somebody who's a user, I can come in here and I can do a couple of things. The first is I can double click on it. It will actually open it up. And from here, I can go and actions and purchase. If I have several of them, I can select them here, and then I can come up and click on this purchase button here. Now, in this case, I've actually got 2 that I've set up, and I'm going to go ahead and approve 2 of them at once just to show you that it does happen. Right over here is where you would assign the vendor ID if one hadn't been picked, or if you want to change the vendor ID. And over here is the item detail of what you want to enter. So if it's a non-inventory item, usually this is just fine the way that it is. If it's an actual inventory item, it will validate against the vendor item setup to make sure that the vendor item number is populated correctly. And if you need to change that for whatever reason, you do have that option. And this is just showing the requisition in which it came from, that you can go ahead and click on that document number and drill down into it if you'd like. Now, I'm going to go ahead and click on generate, but before I do, I'm going to just flip back over here. And the reason why is because it doesn't seem to like it when you're actually looking at them and when you click on this generate button. So sorry, I stumped it for a moment. Now I'm going to go ahead and click the generate payables, but now it's saying it's because of the payables. So I'm going to go back to my main screen. There we go. Now I'll be able to generate several at once. And then you can actually determine of whether or not people should, if you want a workflow process for the purchase orders. Maybe after I do this, I want a workflow process that's going to email back somebody what their requisition or what their PO number is for the requisition. Or if they have access to GP, they're able to look that information up as well. So now that I've created those, my purchase requisitions are going to be sitting here in my purchase order entry all ready to go. I just print those out or email them to the particular vendors they need to go to. And then the process from here is the normal process that everybody should be accommodated with to, you can receive in, or you can receive in at the same time you enter an invoice. And then it comes into your inventory if it's an inventory item, or it gets expensed and paid through accounts payable. So that is our demonstration today on how that product can be set up to work. I do know that this was a quick demonstration, but the point that I wanted to make today is that you do not actually have to have a GP license in order to set up a workflow user, and that you can purchase a limited user license to allow your users to enter in workflows and keep some of the security in place as to what things like accounts they can use or what purchase orders they can see. And by using the web portal, sorry, not the web portal, but by using GP Web Client, they can have access to GP without actually having to have it installed on their machines. So they can go in and log in and enter those transactions whenever it's convenient for them. So at this time, I would love to hear if anybody has some questions or comments that they'd like to add. If there's any way that Judy and I can help you, if this looks like something that might be a good fit for your company, please reach out to us, either by phone, by email, privately. The email address here is our support email address, which of course that normally does go to Deb, who is our owner, and she will coordinate correctly. Or you can also email me. My email address is jessica@iscorp.biz. And we'd love to hear from you guys.
Jessica, that was fantastic. That looks so slick, and the time that it will save. And so anyone can set up those workflows. That I find fascinating. And if we want to invite you, if you do have questions, please feel free to type them in. I do have one question here. Okay, about the Canadian customers, they can use this too, these workflows, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I
double checking since we're close to Canada here in Minnesota. Not in Utah where you're located, but you're in Minnesota. We're close to Canada. I want to make sure they can use this feature too. So
of course, yes, our demo environment, unfortunately, just sometimes it doesn't play nice with multi-currency because we don't actually have translation rates set up, which is why
makes sense.
I chose a US customer. But yes, no, it supports multi-currency, and with the web client, anybody can really access it from just about anywhere. It just depends on what your IT staff policy is on pointing that particular website externally past your firewall.
Wonderful, wonderful. That is just so fascinating. And the time this would save, and there's so many people on vacation right now, this just makes complete sense where they could log in and approve things, set things up while they're on vacation too. So great, great. Well, thank you so much. And if you do think of questions afterwards, feel free to email us. Thank you again all for attending this fantastic webinar today, Jessica, and I'll have a great day.